All right, everybody, welcome back to part 2 of our episode with Jesse. I was going to say your last name, but I don't even know what it is.
Mancinone.
Mancinone. Yeah. Nice, an Italian name, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, usually people say macaroni, so I usually just don't even bother.
My last name is Licata, and I get...
Ricotta?
I get Licata. There's just so many different ones. No one can ever spell it right, though.
It sounds like a unique type of Italian cheese, though, like ricotta.
Yeah,
Licata.
well, that's how I explain it when the people are trying to pronounce it. I'm like, either it's like regatta or like Hakuna Licata. That's what I do. So it's kind of like a big nickname in the family. So I guess thanks for coming back again, even though that we just ended the other one a few minutes ago. So we want to know more about your private practice, because that's like the new thing going on in your life. So why don't you tell us, I don't know, maybe how it started or what you are trying to do, your mission, your vision, anything of that nature.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very long story, but just for the sake of brevity, you know, Warriors Walk Integrated Counseling is really a culmination of all of my life experience, my experience of recovery, my educational experience, and my career work. You know, right. I've been in the addiction field for about 13 years now. And I've had the benefit of working in a variety of capacities, you know, detox, residential, outpatient, and then I did substance use prevention for about 8 years across the state of Connecticut, and was up and down the Northeast as well. And, you know, was really collaborated with, you know, anywhere from local level, you know, community peeps, all the way to, you know, I just did a panel presentation the other day with a DEA federal agent. You know, wow, so I've been in that field for a while, and you know, I've been on the front lines with a lot of the prevention stuff, like the prescription drugs, when we really, you know, that prevention started in the early 2000s. And you know, there's a slogan that SAMHSA uses, Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration: prevention works, treatment is effective, and recovery is possible. I've experienced all three of those. Mm-hmm. If it's done properly, you know, with you know, with people that know what they're doing, and it's administrated in a science-based, you know, evidence-based fashion. So like, it's hard to really put it into words, but like I knew I was going in private practice for a long time. Ultimately, it's been a big goal of mine.
Right.
But I would say, like, when I was doing the prevention, especially with just all the opioid deaths that continue to still be a problem.
So I want to stop you for a second. Okay. So what's prevention like? Is that, you know, at like a base level, like the DARE programs and like stuff like that? Is that what you mean when you're talking about like prevention?
Essentially, yeah. You know, people will badmouth DARE. You know, the feds won't fund it anymore due to it not being effective. However, it hasn't been delivered how it's supposed to be delivered. It's actually designed to be delivered 5th grade through senior year in high school, in a variety of capacities. So like in a comprehensive way, it would be more effective, but I still think DARE is good for building relationships with youth and law enforcement. But DARE would be an example of a prevention program, you know. And
right, yeah, that's the only one. That's why I threw it out there.
That's kind of the most famous one. But, you know, I think prevention is the least funded, partially because data-wise, it's harder to, you know, put into data than treatment. But that's getting better as well too, you know. And
so what are some other types of like prevention programs that exist? That's the only one I really can think of off the top of my head.
Right. Well, there's several science-based prevention strategies that have been proven to work, and it's not rocket science. Just look at Sudafed, right? With meth and crystal meth, and how that was been illegally, you know, made in dangerous labs across the whole country and world. Like, they passed legislation to put Sudafed behind the counter.
Got it.
So people are still going to make meth, but the rates have gone down.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So like, restricting access is a big one. Like, if I put, you know, like a gun over here on the counter, and then I put a gun in a safe over there, like, which one is the kid more likely to pick up and use? You know, so
yeah, okay.
Some of them are very basically common sense approaches, but environmental prevention is always the most effective. And the classic example, the analogy that's given is like, if we're all in a room that's really cold, I can go up to each individual person and put a sweater on each one, or I can just go up to the temperature and turn it to 70, and the whole room is treated. So environmental strategies are typically the best.
Got it.
So where does weed sit in terms of like prevention? Because it's like, I feel like that's, you know, and we did a podcast a little while ago about the legalization of marijuana. I think it's a horrible idea. We're seeing more and more young adults, 18, 19 years old, who are going through psychosis from smoking pot. where does that sit in terms of prevention and all these lobbyists? We actually just found a study which was actually really fantastic, that the argument that the lobbyists are making that marijuana like reduces opioid death, the study ended in 2010. The funny thing about that is that like the opioid crisis didn't really start to pick up until like 2011, 2012. So, right, the study that all these people are saying like, oh, marijuana reduces opioid death and we can use marijuana for opioid treatment, is a study that is completely outdated in the big picture. And somebody basically followed up that study and continued to go through. And what the current study is looking like, that all the lobbyists are trying to keep quiet, is that marijuana increases your rate of opioid death by 23%. Mm-hmm. And so in a prevention model, right, like if you want to stop things from before they get started, where's that, like, how's that working right now?
Well, I was fortunate enough to really work hand in hand with really the premier prevention movement against legalization. Kevin Sabet has a really cool website. He's the main guy that's doing a lot of the research. And what I like about him is he doesn't say no, never right from the jump. He says, let's be patient and do it in an informed way. To rush it and to just put it out there, I agree with you. I think it's a mistake to make it recreationally legal. I definitely have biases, but at the same time, I don't think people realize the blight that's going to take place. Like, they're seeing in Colorado and stuff like that, and just a lot of the data. I mean, you can't argue.
Everybody's keeping it super quiet because the government is able to make so much money off of the taxes. They're taxing it 25%.
Mm.
Right. I think for me, like, wanting to be right all the time is like an effective motivator for me to like really look at what the current science says, like you said. And I think you have to really look at it with a fine-tooth comb. I recently found it was synthesized all the most recent data. And my understanding of it is, from an analgesic perspective, pain prevention, it correlated with 40% pain reductions in chronic pain patients. Chronic pain patients, a good percentage, were able to come off opiates. The PTSD study showed with vets, it eliminated nightmares in 75% of the vets, okay? With youth epilepsy, it reduced the spasms 85%. Like, the research is so crystal clear with that, but to me, that doesn't mean it should be recreationally legal. Okay, cool. Yeah. Like, those are the legitimate medical benefits of it. I feel like medically legal and decriminalized, for me personally, that's enough. But talking to kids about it is like your worst possible nightmare in prevention. When I talk to kids, you basically have to go in there like Tom Cruise and A Few Good Men, like with like your case presented, because there's a new presentation that it's what the heck is it called? But it's very like motivational interviewing. Like, you don't tell the kids anything. You say you have them argue against it, right? Or for and against it. You put their responses up at the top. Like it's structured around the core 7 myths. It's a plant, so it's good. It's not harmful. Then you'll say to them, well, are all plants not harmful? Like, what about poison ivy, right? And then so you really give them objective information. That's been the best results that we've seen, where you could see some of the kids did come around but you have to be a skilled facilitator to do it effectively. But it's a tough sell for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm a little bit biased. I don't really think any sort of prohibition's great. I mean, if you draw the line at, saying you can't do this or you can't do that, I think there are definitely a lot of medical benefits. I'm not super educated on any of the numbers like you are. But I mean, you just look at like, alcohol, tobacco, it's, I think it's pretty crazy where we just draw these imaginary lines because of something. If you look at the history of why marijuana was originally, like made illegal, it's like, I mean, it was just to really repress like the black community and inner city communities and stuff like that. There's also a lot to do with like, people owning like, paper companies and stuff like that. And then, putting the axe on it, got a lot of people rich. I don't necessarily think there's going to be this, super crazy fallout. I think there's definitely going to be a fallout. Just like when anything new changes like that. I mean, even look at prohibition of alcohol, like how, like what, I mean, organized crime shot up after alcohol prohibition. And so I think there's definitely going to be like a long period of growing pain, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as dangerous as what's been going on with these prescription opiates for the past, 10 years or however long it's been. Oh, I don't know. Like I said, I'm not medically educated on anything, statistics or anything that nature. Is just personal opinion.
Right. And I think like you can say what you want about the tobacco companies. Like I think they're really going to step in and regulate it in Massachusetts, and people are upset about that. But
regulate tobacco or marijuana?
Of the actual logistical like regulation of it. Like they have an infrastructure in place that has, met certain markers. You know what I'm saying? Right. So like but you're right. I feel like if it had been medically legal and decriminalized since the 20s, the research would be so good by, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's not a good benchmark for research.
I just think right now, like it's just the way it's being done, I think could be problematic. I mean, in Colorado, from the data I saw, 12 to 17-year-old past 30-day use of marijuana, Colorado immediately went to number one within the first year or two. I've seen some data that refuted that, but it wasn't as reliable as the one I looked at. I think another piece that was important, MIT did a study. If you're smoking chronic, if you smoke a large amount, like, a really high, potent weed, it impairs your ability to drive a vehicle for 3 days. Where with alcohol, if you drink it responsibly based on your weight, it processes out of your system more quickly. So I just think, it just needs to be done more mindfully and regulated in a way where you're not like making fluorescent green gummy bears and saying they're for your grandmother. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you get real crazy. I mean, I know when I was out in California, man, like all that wax and all those edibles and stuff that they had were just, it was way too much. It's like I couldn't even do it. Like I was like, I'm too high. Like I don't want to be like this under the influence of marijuana. It'd just be like fucked up.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely gonna be some dangers. Probably a lot of car accidents, stuff like that.
Yeah, right, stuff like that. Yeah.
And then if you have stuff like gummy bears, you leave them out on the counter. Some kid starts to eat them. Like there's definitely gonna be some pretty serious negative consequences.
So Jesse, where's your current practice right now?
Right now, it was set up initially in Prospect, Connecticut as Into Action Counseling Services, and that was just kind of general private practice. I got it off the ground. I had a few clients, and then as time went on, a few things influenced me to really I had this vision to really switch over to Warriors Walk integrated counseling. And part of it was one of my last counseling classes I took for this other degree I was doing was counseling combat veterans. Mm-hmm. And it was me and two other people in the class, and the teacher was amazing. I'm like, who is this guy? I Googled him. This guy, Professor Edward Tick, works for
Where were you taking these classes at?
Southern Connecticut University, cool. Which actually, it was in their LMFT classes. They're number 6 in the country. And a big influence for myself in the practice is that program in particular, Southern. A lot of the Ed and Barbara Lynch started it in the 70s. Fritz Perls, the guy that invented Gestalt therapy, was their mentor. So a lot of their primary students from the 80s and 90s have become my mentors over the past couple of years. So I really started to get more of a family systems influence. And then when I saw the opportunity to take that class with Edward Tick, he works with the Pentagon. He takes vets to Vietnam and does exposure therapy. I mean, the guy's doing great work, and he's, really healing vets through the archetypes of the Native American warrior spirit, as well as Carl Jung's archetype of the warrior. And so he and Professor Edward Tick is friends with, these authors, Gillette and Moore, who wrote King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, right? King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. Carl Jung, Freud's primary disciple, analyzed thousands of people, and those are the 4 archetypes that he really teased out of there: King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. And it's a really complex, cool personality theory of personality construction. And Carl Jung really flushed out this idea of the anime and the animus, which is we have these male and female mass energies inside of us. And, the key is to really have them as balanced as possible. And my professor, Ed Tick, was, really close friends with some of these of Jung's kind of,
students or something like that.
Yeah, like extended, right. Disciples or whatever. But so when I took the counseling combat veterans class, like this warrior thing kept coming back to me. And I really try to live my life ultimately by doing what I think is God's will for me to the best of my ability. And whether that means selling everything in, doing missionary work in India or having a kind of niche private practice in Greenwich, my motivation necessarily wasn't for the money. It was I felt guided to do it So I was for some reason, all my insights really come in the bathroom, which is kind of embarrassing to admit, but it just popped into my
your best thinking, Don.
It popped into my
Definitely
head.
the best thinking.
Warriors walk integrated counseling, leading men on the hero's journey towards self-discovery. That
Right.
just popped into my head.
Okay.
And essentially, you know, what really, I called up a provider of mine he's a APRN prescriber. I was actually really struggling with a bipolar episode, and I called him for support. And by the end of the phone call, he offered me a free space in Greenwich to set up my private practice in.
Really?
Which is why for me, like, asking for help is so important, because you never know what's going to come out of it. And he,
Right.
you know, Nick O'Brien, he's a psych APRN in Old Greenwich, also a combat vet from Iraq War, great guy. And he really gifted me that space right now, because kind of part-time.
Right.
And so, you know, what really kind of was the final straw that really had me switch over to men only was doing all the prevention work, looking at all the data in Connecticut. 75% of the people that have died from opioids in Connecticut, 75% are white men from 25 to 55.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a serious problem. You know, I mean, the way I look at it, if you look at the deaths from 18 to 24, minuscule. Something is happening between 18 and 25. And even in my old practice, I always get 18 to 24-year-old white young men.
Can you, because I got lost in those numbers for a second. Can you just run me through what those numbers were again?
Sure. Out of all the opioid deaths in Connecticut, however, I think it's a couple, I don't know the exact, but it's over 1,500 since over a 10-year period.
Okay. You said that was 75% have been white males
25 to 55.
Okay. So you're saying that there's something happening between that 18 to 25-year-old range, which is increasing? Or?
This is just anecdotal in my observations.
Right. Yeah. This is the conclusion you're drawing.
Like one of my last clients, a young white young man, he was at a very high level successful school in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
Stopped taking his ADHD meds because he felt that it's like conspiracy theory. They don't really work. You're not supposed to take them. He was kicked out of college, living in his parents' basement, and completely, totally miserable. Very intelligent, very creative. And I just think, ultimately, I think boys aren't becoming men in this. And part of it is it's complicated. A lot of it has to do with rituals being taken out of our society.
Right.
Gangs and military are the two primary ones. So ultimately, I think the mission of my practice ultimately is to initiate boys and men into manhood. Mankind Project, the new warrior training, is also a big part of my experience. Mm-hmm. It's a very kind of secretive men's training that people have been trying to get me to do for a long time.
Okay.
And it's a lot of the ideology is similar to this as well. But I just think ultimately, if you look at, from my observations, I think women are doing much better than men in our society right now. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I feel like women are much more well-adjusted, mentally tough, doing better in the workforce, it seems lately as well. And I just think that population of men needs support.
Right.
I mean, and we see it at Surfside all the time. I mean, we only deal with 18 to 34-year-old men, but, so many of these guys are so dependent on what their moms say. And their dads for that matter. And their parents say it to me all the time prior to admission, as we're working the details out and, trying to figure out if their kid's a good fit. They'll always say like, oh, he's 25 years old, but he really acts like he's 12. And so there becomes this dynamic between the parent and the child where, the parent consistently thinks their kid, yes, is a grown man, but acts like a child, so they treat him like a child. And the grown man consistently acts like a child and allows his family he stays stuck in that cycle of, I need my parents to do these things for me. So he never moves out on his own, starts to like figure things out. I say it to parents all the time, like to give your kid the integrity to fail is really an excellent gift. Mm-hmm. And so many of our guys, their parents don't want them to fail and baby them in the process,
Yeah, I think if you look at, and this is why I really, the family systems information I found really it informed me in a way I wasn't like, because if you think about it, when you're born, like your mom's like the first person that's there. It's like mom, us, right? So it's tough, but how you raise your kids does affect how they end up later on in life.
Right,
This is
of course.
a fact. You know what I'm saying? So, if this is the relationship and then, the child is going over here and mom's like, no, get back here. Like, no, get back here. Yeah, no, get back here. If dad isn't, involved enough, like you can get this is what happens where you get young men with way too much feminine energy inside of them. And I'm not saying that like this isn't a uniform thing across the board. There's relationships where men are more feminine and women might like that. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not trying to say this is the case
You're
across
not saying
the board.
it's wrong or anything like that.
Just overall, what I'm seeing is this type of like mama's boy and there's a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy, where it's like, that being a nice guy, right? That's like a loaded term, and I think it's really complicated.
And women say it all the time, like, I don't like nice guys.
It's unfortunate. I mean, I think a lot of
it's sad.
Yeah,
but
it really
like
is.
and I used to say it all the time, like, I'm going to be single forever because I'm too nice. And it's like, and I think there's this healthy balance. For me, I think a lot of the stuff that you talk about, for me, comes through independence, right? Like being able to live on your own, being able to pay your own bills, not calling home, whether it's mom or dad, and saying, hey, I talked to a family last night and they have acknowledged that Surfside has everything their son needs, everything. Problem is, they would rather him be 2 hours from home instead of 4 hours because 4 is just too far.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was just talking about.
And I said to the father, I was like, but how is that really much different? Well, it's going to be so much harder for us to visit. I was like, but your son's a 20-year-old man. Like, yes, we would want you to visit and we would want you to participate in our family program, but the reality of it is like, he's a grown man. Like, if he was at college, would you go visit him at college every weekend? And the reality of it is yes, that father would. Which then becomes this whole other problem because you have this grown man who can't go do things, right? Can't be with his friends or girls or whatever because every weekend he's with mom and dad. And I mean, I find that, we've seen that a couple times with guys who've graduated Surfside where, now they're independent, but they're with their parents every single weekend. And like, I'm not saying family is not important. I don't ever want anyone to ever think that that's what I'm saying, but I think there's a healthy boundary. Like, our job is to fly the nest, right? And in general, and women, right, like what Brian is saying, or not Brian, what Jesse is saying is that like women are doing this better than men. Right?
Do you agree with that? That's what I see.
I mean, I see that there's exponentially more men's programs out there than there are women's. I know that women's programs tend to not be full, and it's hard to get women to go there because they seem to be okay. I mean, 50% of the people in addiction treatment nationwide are men, and they're like, it's some ridiculous number, like 40 years old and under. So it's like 50%. It's like half the population is like that chunk of guys.
Okay. I'm just trying to digest the numbers. So 50% of people are male under 40?
Give or take, yeah.
Okay. So the other 50% can be male above 40 or women of any age. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So it's like...
So I was thinking for a second, I'm like, well, 50% of them are male. That means 50% of them are female.
Yeah.
I was listening to it wrong.
No, I would say a good chunk in treatment probably are female. I remember even being...
I'm not saying they're not.
Yeah, no, I know. I just say even growing up in school, like I remember middle school, high school, I'm like, all the girls like write perfectly, get straight A's. I just remember like observing girls even in college of just, they're pretty squared away and like getting after it, I think. And I think this is a complex issue with so many different aspects to it.
Right,
like
it'd be hard to cover it all.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to break it down, I've read a lot of the information. I mean, the book "Way the Superior Man" by David Data, I mean, is a very high level, a book about male psychology. The last 30 gets into tantric sex, which is like, okay, I'm not going to deal with that part of it. It's a little bit too out there for me. But the first part of it is really, really good, and it talks about men, the importance of men living with an open heart. with their vision first and foremost. Even if, and that's what I tell the younger guys I work with, I don't say, I do kind of want to say if they get their ass handed to them and they get dumped, part of me doesn't want to say good, right? Because living your life with the open heart is so important, because you don't want to be that guy that just doesn't live life and you wake up when you're, to me, that's my biggest fear, is waking up at the end of my life and being like, what the hell happened? But I mean, if you really look at like the 1950s and the 1970s with this radical shift in dynamics in society and men and women, historically, that's like 20 seconds long if you look at the history of the universe. You know what I mean? I think men still haven't fully recovered from that and fluctuate between this pushover, nice guy, get in touch with your feelings thing that got taken way too far in the 80s to complete toxic masculinity, right? So really what I'm about is, and what Warrior Walk is really about, is about developing that mature, healthy masculinity, grounded and centered in our authentic self, and really, you know, ultimately achieving self-actualization, which is really what a lot of these different things are about, just developing into our full potential. Yeah,
we were talking about it a little bit before the podcast started. I mean, you were just kind of, you know, talking about how technology's changed so much in the past 10 or 15 years. And I would agree really wholeheartedly with you. I mean, if you look at the generation that was like my grandfather's generation, you know, the World War II guys, World War II vets, and the way they got brought up was drastically different. I mean, my grandfather, I want to say he started delivering papers when he was like 9, you know? I mean, I got my first job cutting lawns when I was 12. I started doing stuff in my neighborhood, but, you know, it was different. Like, he was a Depression era person. He delivered papers so like his family could eat. You know, I cut lawns so I could buy an iPod. Right. You know what I mean?
I didn't even work. I just started reading Playboy at 9. So that worked out really well for me.
Yeah, but I think, like, you know, what you're saying is there's just so many different things that kind of encompass like this, you know, problem or dilemma that we're seeing.
And I also just wanted to just make it clear, like at Warriors Walk, my whole philosophy, we're definitely not anti like women. I think there's a lot of bad. I mean, if you just look at Iraq war, Afghanistan, I mean, technically, like the military policy on women in combat is pretty restrictive, but there's a lot of awesome, badass women who have given their life in combat and or were badass vets. And, you know, so I'm not trying to say there's these like two kind of polarized things. I think sometimes that's what happens. But what I do know, if as men, I've just seen it, where if you don't have a voice in your own sense of conviction, it's just not going to be attractive toward other. You're going to end up in relationships where you're dominated by your partner and have no self-respect, and they end up cheating on you. We were talking earlier about even some studies that have been done with men who lack vision in their life, or testosterone goes down, all these other different types of things. But
this is the failure to launch. Like, we deal with two types of guys at Surfside: failure to launch and chronic relapsers. And usually they can look the same, but
Can you explain what the failure
to launch are people who aren't making age appropriate benchmarks, right? 19, 20, 23, 24, 25 years old, still living with mom and dad. 19, 20, 22, 23, 24 years old, can't seem to get through college, have maybe dropped out 2 or 3 times, can't seem to go get a job, don't know how to get a job, or, you know, every day mom or dad gets home from work and their kid's still sitting on the couch playing video games, and they're like, have you looked for work? And they're like, oh yeah, I can't find a job. But the truth is, they don't even know where to start looking for a job, right? They don't know how to make these benchmarks. And you know very well, like, as Jesse's talking, like, I'm thinking of like a gazillion, really half of our residents that have come through over the last couple of years, like, really fit this, like, no vision, no purpose, no voice, right? They get involved in relationships where they are dominated, and I'm not saying like relationships should be, my philosophy on relationships is sometimes they're 70-30, sometimes they're 30-70, sometimes they're 50-50, but it's like it's a healthy balance, right? It's a partnership. It's not a domination. And men dominating women or women dominating men is unhealthy. And a lot of our guys get in these relationships where it's one or the other. They don't know how to have that healthy relationship where they get involved with these women who 100% dominate them and make them feel like crap and make them spend money on them and, you know, verbally abuse them and cheat on them, but continue to keep them in that relationship. Or we see guys who treat women horribly, you know, and are sleeping with multiple women at the same time, and just like using women as like a sexual being instead of like treating them as a human being.
Yeah, it's usually one or the other.
Right. And I think all this stuff really is like ultimately what we're doing. And I think it's interesting because me and Jesse, like, we've not really talked about this too much, and you know, our friendship goes, it's kind of crazy how long we've known each other at this point. Makes me feel old. But like, this isn't really the stuff we talk about, you know, where it's usually lighthearted, we're screwing around. And so it's interesting for me to like listen to this practice, and, you know, like he's been kind of doing very similar work that we're doing in Surfside, but he's been doing it at Connecticut. And, a different capacity individual.
Right. We're doing different.
And that's what I really obviously I'm biased, we're best friends, but you know, I've been, like I said, I've been in the field for a while. I've seen a lot of different, you know, the treatment field develop over the years. And I really like what you guys are doing, you know, just from it just seems like you have a very, very ethical, but also like hip and modern look, you know what I'm saying? Because like, I think like the message has to have depth and weight, you know what I'm saying? Like you need to meet people where they're at. And also, like, I really like how you guys do. It's adventure based. You have the CrossFit, the gym membership you offer to really your staff
sports,
and your
all the stuff. Yeah,
I mean, you really want to, and you mix in the 12-step as well, because it's tough. I mean, when you really think about it, even if you go to detox, even if you go to residential, even if you go to extended living, even if you get out, see a therapist, even if you get a sponsor and get recovered through the big book, you're still on the fucking 20-yard line. I mean, that's really the truth. You still have to drive the distance of the field. And that's what people don't realize. Like, recovery and just life in general is fucking challenging. And I just think, like, a big part of it is just, and for me, what I see with my clients and even myself, this being touchy and so sensitive and taking everything personally. I do want to put in a plug for the philosophy of Stoicism. Stoicism has totally revolutionized my entire life, and it's really tied into you know, Warrior's Walk. And you know, Marcus Aurelius, he's accredited really with, he's the you know, one of the last great Roman emperors. He was really accredited with cognitive behavioral therapy. The one quote he made, you know, things are basically what I think they are. Just a terrible paraphrase, but CBT basically comes out of that. And the Serenity Prayer also comes out of Stoicism. And it's been helpful for me because like it seems a little morbid sometimes with Stoicism, but the exercises for it are like, you look forward to being insulted. Since I just reframed it that way, which is cognitive behavioral therapy ultimately, I've noticed that like, and I've exposed myself to that, of wanting to get those little hits from people and not having to respond back, because I do think as men, I think a lot of times we should not actually show our emotions. And I think that gets taken to, I think I do have to express my emotions, but there's a time and a place for them, you know? And I just think that, you know, it really comes down to having guidance and direction. You know, it's just challenging to not have to do anything without a guide of some kind. You know? And I really feel like my practice really offers that to I mean, it's very fledgling. You know, I've just got it opened off the ground. I had my first client, sure enough, 21-year-old, you know, white kid at school, hasn't started using yet, and I was shocked he even agreed to see me based on what the parents, I could not believe it. Which is why I think, you know, bringing prayer into my practice has been effective, because he's done 100% of my homework and he's really motivated now. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool to see the spark get lit. But like Ian was saying before, the purpose, I think that's a big part of it too. Just not having a sense of purpose, you know? Yeah. People feel lost a lot now. You know, it's the purpose existence that, you know, people had, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago is just not the same. And that's probably got a lot to do with the, you know, economical climate, the way people are being brought up.
And I think in recovery, it's super tough. Like, I was talking to somebody pretty close to me yesterday. I mean, they're 3 years sober, and they're like, I don't want to say having an identity crisis, but they're kind of like, you know, they're at that point, right? And I say it all the time, like, the first year is easy. 2 years is where the work begins. Let's see if you really can keep this up, because right? It's like, okay, you make it through your first year of sobriety and it's like, woohoo, I'm sober. Like I did that. And then you get into the second year and you're like, okay, like I've started to maybe like enhance my life a little bit, maybe start to get a different job. Then it's like year 3, you turn around and you're like, what in the world just happened? Who the am I? And then I remember like I almost joined the military, like just a complete state of crisis with like who I am and what I was doing. And not necessarily in a bad way, but like I was starting to come into my own identity. And I think when somebody is using drugs and drinking alcohol and all of a sudden they turn around and they're now 22 and this like massive chunk of their life, they've been dependent on parents, using substances. Now they're 22. If they don't have proper guidance through, sponsorship, mentors, counselors,
they don't know what the fuck is going on.
Yeah, and it's like it becomes really dangerous. And I say it a lot of the time. Like addiction treatment isn't treatment. Like it's information. It's literally just the very beginning to open the door for someone to walk into recovery. But there's so much work to be done, and I think. There's just so much work to be done. So I think we have to wrap up. I can see the look in Brian's eye. If you want to get a hold of Jesse, his email address is warriorswalkcounseling@gmail.com. His website is warriorswalkcounseling.com. There is an S on the end of Warriors, WARRIORSWALKCOUNSELING.com. If you need anything from us, let us know. To the gentleman who wrote in about the amends, we will absolutely get to you, but it's not going to happen on this episode. So stay tuned for 1819. That'll be episode 20. We'll do it on our 20th anniversary. Thank you very much.
21.
If you need help, 609-709-0244.
Thanks a lot, Jesse.
Thank you.